Hello and welcome to Catholic Answers Live. I am Cy Kelly, your host. Thanks so much for being here with us. Got an open forum for you today, both hours with Jimmy Akin. So that's always good news on a Thursday. And it's an internet open forum today. So we've got lots of questions we gathered up from the internet. Jimmy gathered them up from the internet. People get in touch with us all different ways. You're always welcome to get in touch with us. If you've got a question, you can send it to one of Jimmy's accounts where he is on social media or whatnot, or you can just send it to radio@catholic.com. Open forum, lots and lots of interesting questions to come. And I can say that with confidence because they're right there in front of me. So I'll probably give out the phone number, but don't dial it because it's just me making a mistake if I do that. Jimmy Akin, of course, senior apologist here at Catholic Answers. The author of The Bible is a Catholic Book and many other things. And also the proprietor of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. Hello, Jimmy Akin.
Hello, Cyril Kellett. Willkommen.
Oh, now why German today? Is there a particular, or just we're going for German?
Yeah, just I sometimes do Japanese. I thought today I'd do German. Tomorrow I might do Italian.
I think I remember
English
an Indonesian
Spanish
guy calling one time, and you said, "Is Indonesian in your
Oh,
hello?" Yeah. So you've.
Oh yeah. Bisa bicara bahasa Indonesia sedikit saja.
That I was gonna say that, but I didn't. Because it's a Thursday, I wasn't sure if that's the appropriate for today. Because what did you say?
Yeah.
Actually?
I said I speak a little Indonesian.
Oh, that's awesome. All right, I almost gave out the phone number there, but I'm not going to do it. Tomorrow is a Friday. That means there'll be a new episode of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. What should we expect?
Well, last week we did part one of a two-part look at spontaneous after-death communications. And so this Friday, we're going to be doing part two. We're going to be talking about additional factors that pertain to after-death communications. Surprisingly, when you actually ask them, people don't tend to volunteer this, but when you actually ask them, between 40 and 50% of the population report having at least one spontaneous after-death communication with a loved one at some point during their life. It may be a sense of their presence. It may involve physical senses. They may see them. They may touch them and feel resistance when they touch them. It can involve any of the physical senses. It can also be symbolic. But this is an astonishingly common phenomenon. And so this time we're going to mostly be looking at what should we make of it. Are there purely natural explanations for this? Are there paranormal explanations for this? What really is going on here?
Oh, very cool. Check it out. So you can get episode 1 right now if you want, but tomorrow morning, the second episode on spontaneous after death. Did you say appearances? Or communications. All right, that'll be tomorrow. All right, it's an open forum, an internet open forum, and this one comes from Andrew. Do we know anything about the families of the apostles other than Peter, who had a mother-in-law? Which ones were married, who had children, etc.?
Well, we don't know specifically. There are a few early accounts that would indicate now. Andrew said other than Peter, but I'm gonna violate that a little bit because there are some early accounts that say in addition to having a wife and a mother-in-law, Peter also had a daughter. And there are even some attempts at her name, but they're like variations on Peter that are just feminine and like Petra. So I don't think that's reliable, but it may be true he had a daughter. When it comes to the others, we know most all of them were married. And that includes the so-called brothers of the Lord. And the reason we know that is in 1 Corinthians 9:5, Paul is talking about his own apostleship, and he says, "Don't I have the right to bring a believing wife with me like the other apostles and the brethren of the Lord?" So that would indicate that most all of them were married and presumably would have had children too, but we don't have the specifics. He does make two exceptions to that, himself and Barnabas. So neither Paul nor Barnabas had a wife. We also know in terms of Paul's family that he had a sister because she's mentioned in Acts 23:16. She doesn't appear on camera, but Paul's nephew, her son, does appear on camera in Acts 23:16. There is a group of Jews who, Paul's been arrested at this point in Jerusalem, and there's a group of Jews who have sworn they're not going to eat anything until they kill him. And so they have a maneuver they want to use with the Roman authorities to get him out where he's exposed, and they can ambush Paul and kill him while he's under arrest. But the son of Paul's sister, so he had both a sister and she had a son, so he had a sister and a nephew, learns about this and reports it to Paul, who then has him go to the Roman authorities. And to prevent this attempted lynching, the Roman authorities have Paul moved out of Jerusalem that night in the dead of night. So we know that about his family. We also know a little bit about Barnabas's family, because in Colossians 4:10, Paul mentions that John Mark, the author of the gospel, is Barnabas's cousin. And so we know that that Barnabas must have had siblings, either a brother or a sister, one of whom had a son. We also know the name of Mark's mother, who could be Barnabas's sister, or she could have married Barnabas's brother. And her name is Mary. She's mentioned in Acts 12:12, where after Peter is freed from jail, he goes to the house of Mark's mother, Mary, which was apparently a meeting place in Jerusalem for early Christians. And since it's referred to as the house of Mark's mother, that would suggest, although not prove, that Mark's father was deceased. So that's what we know. We know most of them had wives and presumably children. Paul and Barnabas didn't have wives, but we know a little bit about both of their families.
Andrew, thank you for starting us off with a very interesting question. It's an open forum. It's an internet open forum today. Jimmy Akin, our guest, both hours. And this one comes from Jate. I'm curious about John chapter 10, verse 18, where Jesus talks about having the power to lay down his life and take it up again. Does this mean he could have chosen to die right then, or could it suggest that he had the option to remain on the cross longer before choosing to die?
Well, the natural interpretation of this is that it's a simple statement about the fact that Jesus is in control of his destiny. The Jewish authorities and the Roman authorities don't have the power to make decisions over him. At one point, Jesus even tells Pontius Pilate, you have no authority here, that hasn't been given to you from above, meaning by God. So this statement in John 10 is basically just an affirmation that nothing's happening to Jesus that isn't part of the plan that he doesn't have authority over. He's been given authority by his Father to lay down his life, so the Father has authorized that plan. And he's correspondingly been given the authority to take his life up again. Now, in terms of the instrumentality of how the first one happens, we know that it was the Father's will for Jesus to lay down his life by being voluntarily crucified. So the passage in John 10 really doesn't tell us anything about the details of this plan. It could be that Jesus was authorized to lay down his life only on the cross, only at the time he did, dying at precisely the moment he did. Or it could be that he had broader authority than that he might have been able to die in some other way or at some other time. But if so, the passage doesn't tell us that. So all we can safely conclude from the passage is that Jesus did have authority to lay down his life and reclaim it. But in terms of the details about how and when that would happen, we have to leave that up in the air because the passage just doesn't tell us.
Jate, thank you for the question. It's an internet open forum today. Learn from me the parables, sermons, and conversations of Jesus Christ. That is the theme of this year's national conference, National Catholic Answers Conference. It'll be September 26th through 29th right here in San Diego. And Scott Hahn will be there. Kimberly Hahn will be there. Father Sebastian Walsh, many others. Jimmy Akin will be there. It's a wonderful event that we have each year on the last full weekend of September. which usually means something like perfect weather here. If you want to find out about it, get the information on the where, whens, hows, and whats, just go to CatholicAnswersConference.com. CatholicAnswersConference.com. We'd love to see you there.
Catholic Answers Live.
Do you have a question but prefer to ask it privately? Catholic Questions can help. Go to CatholicQuestions.com to ask your question online, email us, drop us a letter, or give us a call. Longtime Catholic Answers Live apologist and author Jim Blackburn or another Catholic Questions apologist will be happy to assist you. Catholic Questions proudly supports Catholic Answers Live, so visit us at CatholicQuestions.com today. That's CatholicQuestions.com.
Proclaiming the faith, changing lives.
The year was 2000. EWTN's coverage of the Jubilee year includes Pope John Paul II opening the Jubilee door, his trip to the Holy Land, the canonization of St. Faustina in Rome, and the beatification of Jacinta and Francisco Marto in Fatima, Portugal.
To learn more about Mother Angelica's life and the history of EWTN, visit EWTN.com/Mother Angelica.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. It's an open forum. Jimmy Akin is here. All of our questions are from the internet today, Internet Open Forum. And this one comes from Damon, who wants to know, what sacraments can angels administer? I've heard stories of angels administering Holy Communion, and even heard once of an angel hearing confession. And it made me wonder if there have been any other sacraments they've been known to administer.
Well, I've heard some of the same stories, like at Fatima in 1915 to 1917. Some of the Fatima children reported an angel bringing them Holy Communion before the appearances of Mary began. Of course, that's private revelation, and so those reports are not certain. We shouldn't assume that they're automatically accurate, although the Church has approved Fatima as a general apparition. These experiences, in terms of their physical nature, which is a separate question, they might represent visionary experiences rather than true sacraments. So it could be that the children had a vision of receiving communion, for example, rather than physically receiving it, although it could also be that they physically received it. And, that wouldn't have to involve the angel doing more than being an extraordinary minister of Holy Communion. I mean, he could have gotten communion from a tabernacle here on earth and then brought it to the children. On the other hand, it may be that some angels may be priests, in God's heavenly temple. And in fact, we even have evidence that some of them are, because they're depicted as worshiping God in his heavenly temple. And that would suggest they're priests. In fact, we even see them doing priestly duties in the book of Revelation, like burning incense in God's heavenly temple. So it's quite possible that some of them are priests. I would caution that not all of them would be priests, because the term angel literally means messenger. That's the base meaning of the word. And so their base job is not to be priests. These days, we just apply the term angel to everybody who's up in heaven, who's not a human, and not God. So any non-human created spirit in heaven, we call an angel, whether their job is being a messenger or whether their job is being something else, like a heavenly priest. But we have evidence that some of them are heavenly priests, and consequently, it's possible that they may, not saying they do, but they may be able to confect the Christian sacraments. In fact, the earthly liturgy even envisions a role for the angels in the Christian sacraments. If you read the Roman canon, which is Eucharistic prayer number 1, at one point the priest prays this. He says, "In humble prayer, we ask you, Almighty God, command that these gifts be borne by the hand of your holy angel to your altar on high in the sight of your divine majesty, so that all of us who through this participation at the altar receive the most holy body and blood of your Son." So right here in the Eucharist itself, the earthly liturgy is envisioning angels from heaven having a role in the operation of this sacrament. Hypothetically, if some angels are priests and if they are able to celebrate the Christian sacraments, then hypothetically it would be possible that they might be able to celebrate all of them, but that goes beyond what we actually know. And basically everything in this area is speculative in nature.
All right. Well, thank you very much for the question, Damon. It's an open forum, an internet open forum. Jimmy Akin, our guest. Francisco wants to know this, Jimmy. Is experiencing deja vu the intersection of your current timeline with another?
Well, so we know that one timeline exists, the one that we are part of. It is possible that other timelines exist, but that has not been proved at this point, scientifically or otherwise. Whenever we look at a phenomenon, we want to look at normal explanations for it first before we consider weird paranormal explanations, because normally nature operates according to various laws, and so normal phenomena are more common than paranormal ones. So deja vu has multiple potential causes, some of them normal, some of them paranormal. One of the normal causes would be what's known as source amnesia, or it's sometimes called cryptomnesia. This is where you remember something, but you don't remember where you learned it. And you might have been in a situation in real life previously and you don't remember that situation, so you don't remember the source. But when a similar situation happens to you, it's like, oh, this feels familiar. Mm-hmm. And so that would be an example of source amnesia. It could be in a case of source amnesia or cryptomnesia. Kryptos is Greek for hidden, and mnesia is related to memory. So this would be a hidden memory. It could be the hidden memory is based on something that happened to you in real life, or it could be something that happened to you in a dream, which may be part of why you don't remember it, because we're programmed to forget our dreams. That's why you can remember the events of last night much better than you can remember what you dreamed last night, because we're programmed to forget, apparently, so that our memories aren't clogged up with a bunch of confabulation that would lead us astray. And so it's possible that you could have dreamed an event, and then when something similar happens in real life, it may feel familiar, even though you can't remember having the same thing happen before. Another proposed normal explanation is a mismatch in the processing speeds of different parts of the brain, because it takes time. Our brains our processing ability takes time, and so it's possible that one part of the brain might process an aspect of the experience you're having earlier by milliseconds than another part of your brain, and that mismatch in timing could make it seem familiar, like you've already experienced something. So that's another proposal. If psychic functioning is real and precognition exists, then it's also possible you could have precognized what's going to happen to you, and then forgotten the precognition. So you would have sort of source amnesia coupled with precognition. And this is where we get into the timelines area, because we then have to ask, well, if it's precognition, how does precognition work? One of the things that is reported about precognition is that it's possible to avoid frequently parts of what are precognized. This is what's known as an intervention paradox, where you intervene on the basis of a precognition to change what otherwise would have happened. So to give an example, let's suppose I'm a commuter. I take a 7 a.m. train to work every day in some major city. And one night I have a dream in which I precognize that the 7 a.m. train is going to derail and I'm going to be injured. Okay.
Yeah.
So what I do when I wake up, I go to the station early and I take the 6:45 train instead of the 7 a.m. train. So I get to work just fine. I'm not injured. But when I get to work, I read on my phone, guess what? The 7 a.m. train did derail. So I would have been on that train and probably, according to my dream, would have been injured if I hadn't intervened to to address that situation. And so it seems, based on intervention paradoxes, that we're not sensing the actual fixed future.
Oh,
We're
yeah.
sensing what may happen or is likely to happen.
Yeah.
And if we're sensing what may happen or likely to happen, then we could actually be sensing a neighboring timeline where that did happen. At least that's one speculative possibility. But as I say, normal explanations are more common than paranormal ones. And so in looking at deja vu, we shouldn't just assume anything paranormal is going on here, unless we have evidence that would rule out the normal explanations.
Oh, that's so interesting. Francisco, thank you very much for that. I appreciate that question. Jimmy Akin is our guest. It's open forum today, but an internet open forum. Ryan wanted to know this. What's the best answer that I can give my dad about why people who are members of Opus Dei scourge themselves as a form of penance? He seems to think it's not biblical.
Yeah, I should point out, I don't think everyone in Opus Dei does this practice, but some of them do, or other painful practices that involve self-mortification. Not in terms of responding to your dad, Ryan, non-biblical can be understood in more than one way. One way of understanding the claim that something is non-biblical is that it just means, well, the Bible doesn't say to do this. That's different than saying, oh, this is inconsistent with the Bible. The Bible says not to do this. So you kind of have two different versions of not biblical.
Mm-hmm.
The it's not commanded and the it's positively discommanded. It's forbidden. So let's look at the first one first. The idea that, well, the Bible doesn't say to do this. Okay, that might carry some weight if you believe in sola scriptura. That is the idea that that all Christian scripture, all Christian faith and practice, this would be a practice, needs to be rooted in scripture. And that's a principle that Catholics don't hold. That's a principle Protestants hold. And even most Protestants don't hold this understanding of sola scriptura because they don't have a problem, at least some of the time, they don't have a problem with things that aren't commanded in scripture as long as they're not forbidden. Like it nowhere commands in scripture to use music in the New Testament, to use musical instruments in worship, but that doesn't stop churches from having pianos and organs and guitars and whatever else, other kinds of musical instruments they use. Most Protestants don't have a problem with that. The use of instruments is not commanded, but it's also not forbidden. And so they would put it in a category of Christian liberty. Not all Protestants would do that, though. There are some who sometimes refer to themselves as restorationists that believe we need to use sola scriptura in such a way that we peel off historic practices that Christians have adopted and only go with what's actually commanded in the Bible. And so there are churches, like some in the Church of Christ movement, that would say you should not use instruments in worship. All singing should be a cappella because it does tell us to sing as Christians in the New Testament, but it doesn't tell us to use instruments. And so this is a kind of very restrictive application of sola scriptura. I would note that even in the Restorationist movement, though, they tend to not actually employ this in practice necessarily because scripture doesn't mention anything about having bathrooms or air conditioning in churches, but a lot of churches of Christ here in the South have both. So which to my mind is a good thing, but the New Testament doesn't say to have them.
Yeah.
So this principle this restrictive understanding of sola scriptura tends to be used by Protestants as a matter of convenience. It gets used when they want it. It doesn't get used when they don't want it. Having said that, Catholics don't accept sola scriptura to begin with, so we're certainly not going to accept the idea that that everything needs to be commanded in the Bible. So what about the other option for what it means for something to be not biblical, meaning it would be inconsistent with biblical principles? Well, okay, so scourging in ancient Israelite culture was a form of punishment or the infliction of pain or discomfort because of past sins. If someone has committed a crime, you might scourge them. When receiving a punishment is done voluntarily, it then becomes penance. And we do see people in the Bible engaging in penance, both for their own sins and for the sins of others. For example, at one point, Daniel fasts for 3 weeks because of the sins of Israel. It's not his sins he's fasting for, but it's the sins of his people. So we do see that people can undertake penances in the Bible, both for themselves and others. And as long as these are mild and not seriously damaging, it would be consistent with biblical principles to use scourging or other forms of mild penance. It would be consistent with biblical principles to do that.
Ryan, thanks. You can hear the music. Got to take a break. Right back with more Open Forum with Jimmy Akin on Catholic Answers Live.
Why We're Catholic is the one book you can hand to anyone to invite them into or back to the Catholic faith. With more than 400,000 copies sold, Trent Horn's book has had a #1 ranking on Amazon.com for 5 years running. Now available in softcover, bulk cases, ebook, and on Audible. Find out what the excitement is all about. Order your copies of Why We're Catholic at shop.catholic.com or visit whywearecatholic.com.
As we read the Gospels, every Christian faces the question again and again, what does Jesus mean? Getting the answer right is critical to both growth in holiness and fruitful evangelization. Want to know Jesus better so you can introduce him to your friends? Then it's time to get serious about understanding his words. Why not join Catholic Answers for our 10th annual Apologetics Conference? Learn from me the parables, sermons, and conversations of Jesus Christ. September 26th through 29th, right here in sunny San Diego. Learn from our guests, Dr. Scott Hahn and Kimberly Hahn, Dr. Ray Guarendi, Father Sebastian Walsh, Billy Junker, Father Paul Check, and, of course, all of your favorite Catholic Answers apologists. It'll be 4 days of fun, faith, fellowship, and a live radio show. Seats are still available, but going fast. Visit CatholicAnswersConference.com or call 1-888-291-8000 today.
Our Lord needs articulate defenders of the truth to spread the joy of the Catholic faith. Catholic Answers monthly giving club, Society 315, helps you fulfill the call in 1 Peter 3:15 to always be prepared to make a defense for the hope that is in you. For as little as $10 a month, you'll help Catholics grow in faith, bring lapsed Catholics home, and lead non-Catholics to the truth. Go to casociety315.com and join today.
A beacon is a light, and we'll shine it on God's Word. I'm Deacon Harold Burke Sivers, and I invite you to join me tomorrow for Beacon of Truth on most of these EWTN stations. Now back to Catholic Answers Live with Cy Kellett.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I'm Cy Kellett, your host. Jimmy Akin is our guest for both hours today. So hang on for lots of great questions and answers to come. It's an open forum, and I can say lots of great questions because I have seen them already. It's an internet open forum. Jimmy, I don't have the name is missing on this one, but is experiencing deja vu an intersection of your current timeline with another?
We did that when you slipped backwards in time.
I'm just kidding around because I wanted you to feel okay. I wanted to give you a sense of deja vu.
I see.
But somebody took the name off of it. I know.
Well,
all right. Let's see. I think I'm on Mitch. Is that right? Now I messed up. Okay, we're on Mitch.
Or it says Mitch Teresa, so it could be Mitch or Teresa or Mitch Teresa.
Okay. Was it when Judas received the sacrament of the Eucharist that the devil entered into his soul due to the state it was in?
Okay, so I'm not sure that Judas did receive the Eucharist. You often hear this,
Yeah.
but it's not as clear as you might think. We know Judas was at the Last Supper, but we also know he left during the Last Supper to go report Jesus to the authorities. So the question is, when did the devil enter his heart versus in relation to the Eucharist? Well, we have two mentions of the devil entering Judas in connection with the betrayal of Jesus. One of them is in Luke 22, verse 3. And that indicates that the devil entered Judas's heart before the Last Supper. And, you could infer that anyway, since we know he had made prior arrangements and already gotten paid, in fact. But Luke reports the devil entering him before the Last Supper. John, however, in John 13:27, says that the devil entered Judas when Jesus dipped a piece of bread in a dish, so presumably olive oil or some other condiment, and then handed it to Judas, and that's when the devil entered Judas. The problem is that John's gospel, of all four of them, is the one that never mentions the Eucharist in the Last Supper. It mentions the Last Supper, but because John is writing to supplement the other three Gospels, he already knows the institution of the Lord's Supper is familiar to his audience, so he doesn't bother repeating it so he can save space. But what that does for us is it means we can't tell from John's account, because John is the only one that mentions the entry of the devil into Judas in the Last Supper. We can't tell whether this was before or after the reception of Holy Communion. So I don't see a basis, and regardless of which of those is the case, neither of the two passages we have that mention the devil entering Judas connect it to his reception of the Eucharist. Luke's doesn't, because Luke's mention of the devil entering him occurs before the Eucharist, before the Last Supper even, and John's links it to a different event in the Last Supper, because Jesus is not going to be taking the communion bread and dipping it in condiments.
Right.
So this is a different moment in the meal. So John's connects it to a different moment in the meal than the Eucharist, even though he doesn't mention the Eucharist. I thus see no basis for saying that the devil entered Judas when he received the Eucharist. And also, I would note that it wouldn't make sense for the devil to enter Judas at this moment, because one of the things we know about demons is they are spectacularly averse to the holy. They can't stand the name of Jesus or looking at pictures of Jesus or Mary or things like that. In fact, to my mind, that seems to be what principally makes exorcisms work, is you say these prayers, which are holy, over the demon, over the energumen, the demoniac, and the demon can't stand it at some point. That's why demons don't leave immediately. This is not a legal procedure where you just serve notice and they have to leave. If that were the case, they would get out immediately. But they try to hang on. And what tends to happen is after prayer, after prayer, after prayer, they just get so annoyed by all this holiness that they end up leaving. It's kind of like setting off a holiness stink bomb, and the demons can't stand the holiness. And well, okay, so if that's the case, since we know they're averse to the holy, they're going to be averse to the Eucharist like crazy, because it's Jesus himself. And so especially at the very first reception of Holy Communion, at the very first Mass, this is like a holiness atom bomb going off. And so I don't think that that demons would be interested in trying to get into Judas at the moment of communion at the very first Mass.
Mitch Teresa, thanks very much for the question. Let's go to Sandra's question. Would conjoined twins be able to be married in the church?
Well, the church has no teaching on this, so as always, we have to fall back on the principles of moral theology to try to formulate an opinion. One of the principles is that all adult humans are presumed to have the right to marry unless something prohibits this, like they're already married or they've taken vows that would prohibit marriage. So there's a presumption that they have a right to get married. And you then have to say, well, what could overcome that presumption? Well, one of the things that does overcome the presumption is antecedent, perpetual, and incurable impotence. Impotence means the ability to pay the marriage debt, or the inability to pay the marriage debt. And if you can't ever pay the marriage debt because this is an already existing condition, it's not like you had it, it's not like you were potent when you got married. You were already impotent, already unable to pay the debt. And it's a perpetual condition, meaning it's always there. It's not like you can pay the marriage debt sometimes, but not other times. If it's perpetual, so you can never pay it, and if it's incurable, so that you can't fix it, then you're unable to fulfill one of your basic marital duties. And so as a result, the church has always regarded antecedent, perpetual, and incurable impotence as an impediment to marriage. So let's apply that to the situation of conjoined twins. Well, twins can be conjoined in different ways. Sometimes they're joined at the head, sometimes they're joined at the hip. Sometimes they may only have one set of parts needed to perform the marital duty. And if they have only one set of parts, then that set of parts may only belong to one of the twins. They may be conjoined in such a way that the other twin simply has no parts. And if that's the case, then the other twin, the one that doesn't have the parts, would be antecedently, perpetually, and incurably impotent, and thus that twin would not be able to get married. But that's not the only way that twins can be conjoined. And so if they're both able to pay the marriage debt, then this would not overcome the presumption of their right, which is a natural law right to get married. Now, you might have a question about, well, if one or both of them gets married, doesn't that mean that there will be a third party present when they do pay the marriage debt? And the answer would be yes. It might be possible, depending on how they're conjoined, to screen the twin who's not married, so that we'll just assume only one of them's married for the moment because it'll make it easier. But it might be possible to screen the situation so that you don't have anybody who's not married directly involved in the exchange of the marital debt. Or you might just have to tolerate there being a witness to this. Some people, and there would be different opinions on this, I would imagine, but some individuals might look at this and say, well, it's unfortunate, but the right to have a marriage is not overcome if there's an unfortunate situation where there has to be a witness when the marriage debt is paid. And so that would be an undesirable, involuntary situation that could be tolerated. And so the twins could get married. On the other hand, some would have a different opinion perhaps and say, no, if there's a witness, that's invalidating and it overcomes the rights of the twins to get married. So I could imagine people having different views on that point.
Well, thank you very much, Sandra, for that question. That does bring us right to the break. Go ahead.
I would say, because it is established that they do have a right unless something overcomes it, the burden of proof would be on the one who wants to say that right has been overcome by something.
Very helpful. Thank you. Sandra, thank you. We'll take a quick break. Be right back with more Internet Open Forum with Jimmy Akin on Catholic Answers Live.
There's only one Catholic Answers Live.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects home buyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
One of the biggest mistakes a Christian can make is to try to do good without God's help. St. Therese said, when we trust only ourselves and not God, our soul becomes incapable of virtue. Her remedy? Works of charity. And the greatest work of charity is to share the gospel. At St. Paul Street Evangelization, a Catholic nonprofit, we encourage you to share the gospel with someone who doesn't know Jesus. Catholic Answers is supported in part by St. Paul Street Evangelization, streetevangelization.com.
Hey, this is Michael O'Neill, the Miracle Hunter. I'll be delving into the fascinating world of miracles and taking you on a hunt that explores the greatest mysteries and marvels of the Catholic Church. I'll be examining what constitutes a miracle, how miracles are investigated and approved, and the role they play in the lives of the faithful. We'll look at the miracles of the Gospels and early Christianity, considering the claims of the miraculous in our own modern age.
The Miracle Hunter, Saturday at 1 p.m. and 7 p.m. Eastern on EWTN Radio.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Thanks so much for being here with us. Jimmy Akin, our guest. It's open forum, but it's an open forum of the internet variety. I have noticed, and I'm not complaining. No groovy music today, or did I miss it? Did we? No, I'm not. I don't want to. I'm not trying to put you on the spot. I just didn't. Okay. Maybe I shouldn't have brought it up. Open forum, internet variety. Lots of questions from the internet. This one comes from Daniel. Someone told me that if you add regular water to a small bit of holy water, the blessing is transferred and the holy water bottle can be filled in this way as long as you don't let it run out. Is this true?
Well, the church has no teaching on this, and as far as I'm aware, neither does it have a regulation on this. So I can only tell you my own opinion here. The theory that's being proposed that you can add regular water to holy water in order to stretch it out indefinitely presupposes that the holiness of the holy water is a kind of contagion, so that it will spread throughout the non-holy water that gets added in. And you know, what would happen at that point is interesting, but there could be different possibilities. Like the holiness could be diluted. You know, if you have, let's say, normal holy water has a strength of 100, and you add you know, an equal amount of non-holy water to it, you might end up with water that is 50% as holy as normal holy water. That would be where the contagion doesn't multiply. It just spreads evenly throughout the mixed substance. On the other hand, it seems that the view that Daniel's entertaining here is one where it doesn't get diluted holiness, where it stays just as strong, and that would imply a kind of contagion that actually multiplies, so that when you pour in an additional amount of water that's equal to the amount that was originally in there, it maintains its 100% holiness. Now, the presupposition that holiness works as a kind of contagion may not be accurate. That may not be how it works at all. Some might even say that's a superstitious understanding of how holiness works. I would say it's debatable. Now, I could see using this procedure, even not knowing how holiness works, I could see using this procedure in extreme circumstances as an act of faith. You know, like if you really need to use holy water and more than you have, then you could add additional water and just trust God as an act of faith that he'll perform blessings through this water. And that would be fine as a kind of emergency measure. But in non-extreme circumstances, I don't think we should be sitting around saying, ooh, how long can I stretch this bottle of holy water out so I don't need to go to a church and get more holy water? You know, yeah. I would say that's not the desirable situation. You shouldn't really be worrying about this under ordinary circumstances outside of, you know, some kind of weird emergency. I would say just go to church and get some more holy water and ask the priest to bless some water for you if you need to.
All right. Thank you very much, Daniel. Appreciate the question. It's an internet open forum. This one comes from Linda. How would you respond to someone who says that they're doing just fine without God and they see no reason to acknowledge him or follow him?
Well, I'd say about, 4 or 5 things. The first one is, well, it's good that you're doing fine right now. That's good. We should acknowledge that. But you won't always be doing fine. Troubled times, including death, are coming, and you'll need help then. In light of that, you should pay attention to God now, because you will be needing him in the future. And you're you're kind of a jerk if you only turn to someone when you need them. Like I can imagine, Si, if you had someone who wanted to just come to you and get stuff periodically and never be your friend outside of a gimme situation, then you wouldn't view that person very favorably. And so that's part of human nature. We don't want to treat other people as just vending machines. We don't want to treat them as objects. We want to treat them with love. And so you should do the same thing to God. Otherwise, you're dehumanizing yourself by treating another person, namely God, as just a vending machine. So you shouldn't do that. Second thing I'd say is even right now, you're not attending to the fact that God is the source of all goodness and love. And you ought to pay attention to that. I mean, goodness and love are things we need and want and are programmed for. And if we've identified the source of where all those things come from and it's God, then you ought to be paying attention to God right now. The third thing I'd say is, even if you think you're doing fine, you ought to be paying attention here. The third thing I'd say is you're also not attending to the fact that you're being helped by God right now. Because since he's the source of all goodness and love, any goodness and love that you have in life right now is because God's supplying them to you, either directly or through other means. They're all coming from God. And by not acknowledging God, you're being kind of ungrateful. So you want to thank God now for the blessings you have now. If you say, I'm doing fine right now, great, but praise God for the fact that you're doing fine right now. The fourth thing I'd say is you could be doing even better than you are right now. It's good to have things be going fine, but it could be even better, because if you turn to God, to the source of goodness and love, then you'll have more goodness and love in your life. So you could be doing even better. And the fifth point I'd say is, if you want to spend eternity with joy and love and goodness, you're going to need to turn to God at some point, because being with him is the only way you have those good things for all eternity. So the sooner you get in on a relationship with God, the better it'll be, and the more secure it'll be for you in the future, and also the more rewards you'll have in the future.
Linda, thank you. Thanks for the question. I hope that was helpful to you. A lot of different things to say in response there. So, Linda, thank you for the question. It's an internet open forum. All of our questions have come in one way or another over that massive web of electronic connections we all live. Do we live in it or with it? I guess I'll say with it. This one comes from John. Could you go over the meaning of transubstantiation and what to say and not say in the sacrament of reconciliation? If you like, I can explain further. Just text me. Oh, okay. All right. Thank you, John.
Yeah, and I did contact him. John is also a priest, and so he was coming at this from a kind of priestly angle, which is a little bit different than how a lay person might interpret some of the questions. So it was helpful to speak with him. Mm-hmm. Okay, so transubstantiation, if you need to explain it to someone without a lot of philosophical terminology, I do it this way. I would say that transubstantiation is when the substance of bread, the reality of bread and wine, is transformed into the reality of Jesus's body, blood, soul, and divinity. What that means, without a bunch of philosophical jargon, is that the bread and wine that used to be on the altar are now gone. They are no longer there. Only the appearances of bread and wine remain, and what is now really present is Jesus Christ himself, although he's under the appearances of bread and wine. So that's a simple explanation of transubstantiation. When it comes to confession and what not to say in it, what Father was thinking of is extraneous things that penitents sometimes want to discuss in confession. They may be angry or frustrated, and they want to vent psychological frustrations, mm-hmm. which is not the same thing as confessing sins. And this is not a psychological counseling session, so there can be a tendency to kind of turn it into one. They also may complain about others or talk about other people's sins, which may be part of their frustrations. And while it's understandable that we need someone to talk to when we're frustrated, this isn't the place for that. One should, if it's ordinary frustrations, you should talk to a friend or a spouse or something like that. When it's a more serious situation, you should talk to a counselor who can give psychological help, which priests actually are not actually trained in usually. But this is for confessing your own sins, and you don't need to give a bunch of detail. You don't need to talk about it's like here on Catholic Answers Live, when we take live calls, people often want to give us the confidential, secret, hidden backstory, origin story of their question before they actually ask the question. And in the same way, people in confession can want to give the origin story for their sin and talk about how they got led into it. That is not necessary, and it can even waste time, especially if there's a long line of people waiting to get into the confessional. You don't need to tell how you got into this situation. You just need to say, I did this and I'm sorry for it. And so you can be very concise in confession. Now, what's sauce for the goose is sauce for the gander. It's not only penitents who can go on at length about stuff that is not on point in confession. Priests can do exactly the same thing. They can start trying to give advice, and sometimes it's spiritual advice, sometimes it's psychological advice, but the advice is usually at least, now I'm sure that it'll be different for different people. If someone hasn't been to confession in a long time, like years, and then they go to confession for the first time in years and they're confessing stuff, they may not have had a lot of thoughts about how to deal with their situation. And so advice could help a person like that. But if someone has been to confession in the last few weeks, when you go in, you say, "Blessed be Father, for I have sinned. It was 2 weeks since my last confession," or whatever. If the priest can tell that someone is a regular penitent, that they regularly go to the sacrament, then they can presume that they already have a pretty good handle on their life situation and their sins and their temptations, and you're not going to be breaking any news to them by making basic suggestions about how to deal with it. I found a lot of priests who just seem to feel in confession that they need to offer some kind of spiritual reflection or advice, and I find it's frankly often not very helpful. As someone who lives an active life, it's like, yeah, thank you. I know my sins. I know what I need to work on. This advice is not telling me anything new. So I would urge priests as well as penitents to be as concise as possible, especially when there's a big line of people waiting to get in.
Father John, thank you very much for the question. Jimmy, think I should go for the next one? It reads a little long, and we're a little short on time, so I could skip.
Let's live dangerously.
Oh, we're going to live dangerously. All right, let's see how we do. Colleen asked this: wouldn't these verses from Mark 7 demonstrate that if Mary had other children, Jesus would not have given her to John to care for? How well you have set aside the commandment of God in order to uphold your tradition. For Moses said, "Honor your father and mother, and whoever curses father or mother shall die." Yet you say, if a person says to a father or mother, "Any support you might have had from me is Corban," meaning dedicated to God, you allow him to do nothing more for his father or mother. You nullify the word of God in favor of your tradition that you have handed on, and you do many such things.
Well, these verses would certainly add evidence to the idea that the so-called brethren of Jesus were not children of Mary, because as Mark 7 shows, Jesus is very concerned about people fulfilling their obligations to their parents under the Mosaic law, and it would make zero sense for him to then entrust the care of his mother to someone who was not her child when she had other children. He would expect those children to meet their obligations towarding their parents, including Mary, if Mary was one of their parents. So these verses, although they don't prove it, they do add evidence or force to other passages that suggest Mary was not the mother of the so-called brethren of Jesus.
Well, I'm glad we lived dangerously. That worked out just fine. Colleen, thank you very much for the question. Thanks to everybody who has sent questions. We've got at least, well, we got many more than would fill another hour, but we'll get through another hour of them in just a moment. So hang on. There's more Internet Open Forum with Jimmy Akin coming right up. And I'll remind you just in the few seconds we have, Catholic Answers Cruise coming up June 29th through July 6th, starting in Montreal, ending in Boston. We'd love it if you'd come. For all the details, just go to CatholicAnswersCruise.com and check it out. Right back with more Internet Open Forum on Catholic Answers Live. Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I'm Cy Kellett, your host. Jimmy Akin is our guest, and I got to tell you, I love a good open forum Thursday when we get Jimmy for both hours, and especially when I have had a week where I've survived, I survived.
And you survived. You survived the eclipse. Yeah, they didn't do the substitute king ritual with you.
No, wait. I think I know what that is, but is that the one? Like, I think it was ancient Mesopotamia or something, where like they know the eclipse is coming and that you got to kill the king, and so they make some poor guy king for the day. Congratulations!
Yeah.
Do I have the basic story right?
Basics, yeah. Now it's connected with Babylonian planetary omens. They didn't do astrology like we do. Today astrologers will calculate where the planets are gonna be and make a prediction on that basis. And they didn't do that in ancient Mesopotamia. Incidentally, it was Mesopotamia where they invented the zodiac, and we can tell that from a variety of factors. But we can tell that's where they invented it. But what they would do is they would wait to see something happening in the sky, and then they would say, okay, we're going to make a prediction based on that. So they didn't do projective astrology where they projected what was going to happen. They did reactive astrology where they reacted to what they were seeing in the sky. One of the a lot of the omens actually deal with the planet Jupiter, which was the king of the planets, and it has a connection with royalty. And so one of them was, if you see Jupiter do this, then it means the king is going to die. So what they would do, and also this is connected with eclipses, and so what they would do is they would find a condemned prisoner and make him king. And they dress him in the royal robes, and they would let him live in the palace and all this kind of stuff. As Gilbert and Sullivan might say, he would live for a month as a fighting cock. He's
the top dog,
being given the royal treatment. And then at the same time, the previous king would be not living in the palace, and he would be like living in an ordinary dwelling, and he's referred to in all the official documents as the farmer, because we're making it really clear to the gods now.
He's just a farmer.
He's a farmer. He's not the king now. The new king is this new guy. And then, since he's a condemned criminal, problem solved at the end of the period. The king dies, and then the farmer becomes the king again.
I guess there's a lot of ways to go if you're a condemned criminal. This is not a bad way to go, all in all. I mean, if you're gonna be condemned criminal.
Yeah, it's basically what Coco proposes to Nanki-Poo in The Mikado.
Oh yeah, that is right. Could they tell when an eclipse was coming though, or was their math not up to that task?
Up to a point, Lord Copper. They knew that eclipses occur on 17-year cycles, and so they could tell when a cycle was coming up. But the issue is, it doesn't happen every time in these cycles. So the cycles that they identified would tell you there's likely to be an eclipse, but not that it's certain that there's going to be an eclipse.
Ah, okay. Well, we had 58% eclipse here, and I thought if nobody told you there was an eclipse, you wouldn't even look up. You wouldn't have.
Yeah.
I think 42% of the sun is still extremely powerful because you wouldn't notice any deviation.
Yeah, it really, you have to get close to totality before the light starts to be noticeably different than what it is normally.
Yeah.
And then when totality happens, it changes in less than a minute. The sky goes completely dark, and it's very fast. And then totality will last, say, 4 minutes if you're directly under it. And then as soon, and you can use, the special protective glasses to look at the sun, and you'll see, oh, wow, it's almost entirely covered and it's still broad daylight. But then as soon as totality happens, it instantly becomes dark. And the reverse happens on the other side of totality. I was filming this yesterday. I put the video on Facebook if people want to look it up. But I drove down to Russellville, Arkansas, so I would be in the totality zone. And I was filming it, and as soon as totality is over, as soon as there's just a little sliver of the sun peeking out from behind the moon, again, that blaze just washes over. You can't hardly see the moon for more than a few seconds.
Wow.
And it looks like it's a full sun up there, even though it's not, just because of how bright that sliver is.
Wow, that is really something. Because that is really something. I've never seen a full eclipse. I know that I've seen. I know back in the 70s, we didn't have Mylar glasses then. You had to like reflect it on
on a piece of cardboard or something.
Yeah, but so I remember seeing it then, and then yesterday Bernadette had glasses, so we went outside and we looked up, and. But I've never seen the full thing. I'd be interested to see it.
It's very interesting to see. The sky basically goes black like it is at night, except there is a white ring hanging in the sky because of the corona of the sun peeking out from behind the moon.
Well, I'm glad we all survived it, and I didn't have to be the substitute king while the farmer took a little vacation on his farm.
Yeah. By the way, speaking of people who don't get executed in conjunction with eclipses, one of them is Jesus. Sometimes people try to explain the darkness during the crucifixion as a solar eclipse.
Right.
Wrong. Solar eclipses cannot occur at Passover because Passover is the full moon.
Oh, yeah.
That means the near face of the moon is fully visible. Therefore, it is not between us and the sun. However, there was a lunar eclipse that night in Jerusalem.
Oh, there was. Oh, that's just a weird fact because that was. Let me get this right. The 30 AD, in all likelihood.
Correct. 33.
Oh, 33 AD.
33.
All right, off we go not to the phones, but to the internet. This one came from John. Does your guardian angel leave you when you die?
Well, the truth is we don't know. There are a number of possibilities here. It could be as soon as your heart stops, your guardian angel punches his pay clock and heads for the door. On the other hand, you might have more than some additional contact with him. One of the things that we read about in the parable of Lazarus and the rich man is that angels appeared and escorted Lazarus to the bosom of Abraham. So that actually syncs up with various deathbed vision and near-death experiences that people have had where figures appear to them either just before they die or even after their heart is stopped. Figures appear to them and escort them to the next life. And these figures sometimes are angels, sometimes they're departed loved ones, but it does sync up with what Jesus said in the parable of Lazarus and the rich man that would suggest angels do this at least some of the time. Incidentally, I find it interesting. There was a study done a number of years ago of deathbed visions, both in the United States and in India. And in India, the messengers that come for you at your death are called yamdoots. And so Christians or people in America would say, oh, the angels are coming to take me to the afterlife. And the Indians would say, oh, I see a yamdoot at the end of my bed. and in Indian belief, if you've lived a good life, it's a pleasant yamdoot that shows up for you. But if you've been naughty rather than nice, a fearsome yamdoot will show up for you. And some of them would report fearsome yamdoots showing up. In any event, your guardian angel might be one of the angels that escorts you or one of the afterlife guides that escorts you to the next life. So you might have a continuing relationship with him, at least until you get to heaven. Or you might have a longer relationship with him. He might be your afterlife buddy. You know, he spent all this time working on you on earth. He may be interested in hanging out with you in the afterlife. He might also get reassigned to one person or even multiple people at the same time, because, as long as he's able to adequately guard somebody, it doesn't matter whether he has one person he's adequately guarding or a bunch of people he's adequately guarding. And maybe angels multitask, and maybe both of those things happen. Maybe he gets to be your afterlife buddy, but he's also looking out for some other people too.
John, thank you very much. Hope I never see the angry yam dude.
Yeah,
no, you don't want that.
It'd be like an angry angel showing up to take you to purgatory or somewhere worse.
But in India, so the yam dude is understood as a spirit, though. As some kind
yes,
of,
yeah. They're like our angels.
Yeah. Thanks, John. That'll bring us to the break. Let's take a quick break. We'll be right back with more Open Forum of the Internet Variety with Jimmy Akin on Catholic Answers Live.
Your questions, Catholic Answers Live.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects homebuyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
The EWTN On Demand platform features 50 new podcasts every week, as well as an ever-expanding library of audio and video content. For Catholics who want to learn more about their faith, simply using their mobile device, computer, or TV. Your favorite EWTN programs are available 24/7. Visit EWTN.com and click On Demand. EWTN is the global Catholic network.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I am Cy Kellett, your host. Jimmy Akin's our guest. It's Open Forum. And again, I will invite you to consider coming to the Catholic Answers Conference. We're going to talk about Jesus, about the parables and sayings of Jesus. Lots of wonderful people will be there. Among them will be Scott and Kimberly Hahn and Jimmy Akin, who you are listening to right now, giving a wonderful variety of talks. It's become a tradition we do it the last full weekend of September right here in San Diego. Check it out at CatholicAnswersConference.com. CatholicAnswersConference.com. Jimmy Ken wants to know this. What are some good research tools and or websites for researching paranormal experiences?
Well, so I guess the first thing I'll do is mention what you shouldn't look at. And in general, what you shouldn't look at is ghost hunting shows on TV, because they're junk. There are basically no good, competent ghost hunting shows. Also, lots of New Age books are written on this stuff, and a lot of them are junk too. I would say now so what he says, what Ken says is researching paranormal experiences, and research gets done on paranormal experiences in two ways. One way is by investigating accounts of individual spontaneous experiences in the field. Like if someone thinks there's a ghost or a poltergeist in their house, or they have a spontaneous premonition of what's going to happen in the future. And so that's one way. That's one kind of research, is field research. Another kind of research is laboratory research, where you have an organized way of trying to study typically multiple experiences. Either you're aggregating reports of field experiences and seeing what can be learned about them in general, even though you're not focusing on just one. Or you're running laboratory tests where you have multiple trials and you see, can we get someone to manifest precognition in the lab, or manifest telepathy in the lab, or manifest psychokinesis in the lab? So it depends on what kind of research in paranormal experiences that Ken is interested in learning about, because there are these two major types, field research and lab research. In terms of a single resource that is very competent, very respected, and takes a very scientific approach to a lot of this, I would recommend the Rhine Education Center. That's R-H-I-N-E, Rhine, like the river. J.B. Rhine was the most famous American parapsychologist in the 20th century. He worked at Duke University, and when he retired, he created a foundation that continues his work. And these days, the Rhine has an education center where they teach online classes. You can go to rhineedu.org to learn about those classes. In fact, I'm a teacher at the Rhine, and just next month, I'm going to be teaching an 8-week class in May and June that is an introduction to parapsychology, where I talk about both lab research and field research and all the different concepts that parapsychology involves. So if you're interested in taking that, go to rhineedu.org and you can sign up. The classes are online. Also, one of the other major instructors at the Rhine Education Center is a gentleman named Lloyd Auerbach, and he focuses on field investigations. So he's like ghost hunting, only done right. And he also teaches a bunch of courses, principally about field investigations at the Rhine. And if you want to have a print resource, I would suggest Lloyd's book, Ghost Hunting, How to Investigate the Paranormal. So that's Lloyd Auerbach, Auerbach, Lloyd Auerbach, Ghost Hunting, How to Investigate the Paranormal. And that will give you a competent look at the subject. And I know some of the things Lloyd stresses, because I've taken his classes and I have his books, is you always look at the normal explanations first, because they're the most likely to be true in a given case. And even in a case where it looks like something genuinely paranormal is happening, there are often aspects of it that are natural, that are not paranormal. And sometimes, even if the case looks really weird, it may actually all be normal. And there may be normal explanations for all of the weird stuff that seems to be happening.
All right. Ken, thank you very much. Appreciate the question. And we got time. I go to Charlie. Charlie's next. Charlie asks this, Jimmy.
We got loads of time till the next break.
Yeah, we do. They redid the studio a little bit, and I have to go kind of look around something to see the clock. If the priest has an accident, for example, spills the host and or wine such that it is not salvageable before, mid, or after consecration, how would this affect the rest of the Mass? If the priest would simply consecrate again, would the procedure change if there's no more host and or wine to consecrate?
Okay, so there's actually a document that the church wrote that deals with all of this. It's the short title of it is De Defectibus, which means on defects. The longer title is like on defects occurring in the celebration of the Mass. And it's part of the older Roman Missal, the one that's used in traditional Latin Masses today. For some reason, when they did a revision of the liturgy, they didn't do a new version of De Defectibus, but it's a great document. It covers all kinds of scenarios for if this defect happens, here's what you do. If this defect happens, here's what you do. It covers things like, suppose the priest is saying, has consecrated the wine and a spider falls in it. What do you do? Or suppose it's wintertime and the priest consecrates the wine and then it turns out it's frozen. How do you deal with frozen wine?
Yeah.
Or suppose he consecrates the host and it bounces and a mouse carries it off. It's got all these interesting detailed scenarios. So you can look up De Defectibus for more. But if one or both of the elements become inedible for whatever reason, then the priest is directed to consecrate new material. So if all the hosts become inedible for some reason, he's supposed to consecrate new hosts. If all the wine becomes inedible, maybe because it was spilled, then he's supposed to consecrate new wine. To the extent possible, De Defectibus says he should do this quietly so as not to alarm the faithful. But if he publicly just knocked over the wine and everybody saw it spill, there's not much you can do. I mean, you obviously want to attend to the wine that has been spilled, but then you want to get new wine and consecrate that. And there's no point in doing that secretly. In fact, you'd want to do the opposite so people could see that you have consecrated this wine. If there is no new material to consecrate, then since Mass requires the consecration of both, then you, in essence, suspend the Mass. If there is a possibility, though, of going and getting more material, you suspend it only temporarily until you can go get some new material and consecrate that.
All right. De Defectibus. Charlie, thanks. Thanks very much for the question. Fred wants to know this. Let us make man in our own image? Who is us and our? Is this an early indication of the Blessed Trinity?
Yeah, so this comes up periodically. One of the options that people sometimes ask about here is this a situation where God is using the royal we? Which is where an individual monarch uses the plural pronoun. So like famously and probably apocryphally, Queen Victoria said, "We are not amused," meaning I am not amused. Well, a lot of monarchs do that, and popes historically have done that. They don't tend to these days, but historically they have. And so God is depicted as a king, and maybe he's using the royal we here. That's one possibility, except it's not, because the royal we only exists in some languages like English and Latin. It does not exist in Hebrew. There are no royal we's in Hebrew. So we know God is talking to someone, whoever the speaker is here, the divine speaker is talking to a different person. And Fred's question is it one of the other members of the Trinity? Well, maybe, but we have a difficulty with that view, which is that the Trinitarian understanding of the Godhead had not yet been revealed at the time the book of Genesis was written. And therefore, since the literal meaning of a text is what the human author intended it to mean, it's unlikely that the human author would have had a Trinitarian understanding of God. Now, God has a Trinitarian understanding of himself, so there can be a Trinitarian meaning in the spiritual sense of the text, which includes what God intended the text to communicate. But in terms of its literal sense, it is improbable that the human author had a Trinitarian understanding of the Godhead. Although I would note that there are passages in the Old Testament that to some Jews in the Second Temple period suggested that there was more than one divine figure in heaven, that you had Yahweh and then a second figure that was sometimes called the lesser Yahweh or the second Yahweh. And this is today referred to as the two powers in heaven doctrine. And hypothetically, if the author of Genesis was aware of the two powers in heaven concept, then he might have envisioned the first person of the Trinity, the greater Yahweh, talking to the second person of the Trinity, the second Yahweh. That would be possible in the literal sense, but it's quite speculative since we're trying to read the mind of a man who lived 1,000 years before the time of Jesus. A safer literal interpretation, and this is the one that I think more biblical scholars would go to, is that what the author is doing is a kind of associative we, where God is talking to the other members of his heavenly council, which we would call angels, and he's saying to them, let's make man in our image. Now, he's planning on making man himself. He's planning on doing all the work, but he's associating them with his plan, which is why you could call this an associative we. It's kind of like if I was planning on ordering pizza for dinner for me and Cy Kellett, I might say to Cy, hey, Cy, let's get pizza tonight. In which case, I'm planning on doing all the work. I'm going to order the pizza. I'm going to pay for the pizza, but I'm associating Cy with my plan to order pizza, even though I'm the one doing the actual work.
Thank you very much. I know it ended with pizza, so I got distracted at the end. But Fred, thanks very much for the question. This one comes from Frank. Why didn't the Pharaoh at the time of Moses, being a firstborn, die during the 10th plague?
Okay, well, the first thing to say is they had very high infant mortality rates in the ancient world, and consequently, a lot of pharaohs were not firstborn. The firstborn would die for any number of reasons, and then one of his younger sons would take the throne. And there usually wasn't a problem getting a younger son to do that because they also practiced polygamy, and some of them had enormous numbers of sons. In this case, the Pharaoh at the time of Moses, or during the Exodus experience, appears to have been Ramesses II. And in looking into Ramesses' family, it looks like he was a firstborn. And so since he didn't die, I would conclude there was likely an age cutoff. Once you were over a certain age and you were a household head, you didn't die. Also, they needed him still alive to give the let go order. So for both of those reasons, I would suggest that's why he didn't die.
Thanks, Frank. Break time. We'll take a quick break. Right back with more Internet Open Forum with Jimmy Akin on Catholic Answers Live.
When it comes to Catholic teachings about Mary, there's one question we hear more than any other. Where is that in the Bible? The answer? Everywhere. In Bible Mary, the Mother of Jesus and the Word of God, Father John Weiss opens Scripture to reveal a Mary who has been hiding in plain sight. Father Weiss discloses the new Eve foretold in the Old Testament and revealed in the New. Order your copy of Bible Mary today at shop.catholic.com or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
When the resurrected Jesus appeared to disciples on the road to Emmaus, they didn't recognize him until the breaking of the bread. The same is true today. In the Holy Eucharist, we really meet Jesus. In The Eucharist is Really Jesus, author Joe Heschmeyer explains how knowing Jesus in the Eucharist is the key to understanding all of Christian faith. Order your copy of The Eucharist is Really Jesus today at shop.catholic.com or get it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Are you scared to talk about abortion? Don't worry, almost everyone is. You can overcome this fear as Trent Horn shows in the newly revised and expanded second edition of Persuasive Pro-Life. With a little knowledge and a few proven techniques, you can become a bold and effective apologist for life. Visit shop.catholic.com to order your copy of Persuasive Pro-Life and never again be afraid to speak up. Also available at good Catholic bookstores.
Is orthodoxy an alternative to the Catholic Church? In a time of uncertainty for many Catholics, orthodoxy can look like greener pastures. Answering Orthodoxy, the new book from Catholic Answers Press, explains why Catholics who are thinking of leaving need to think twice. There are important reasons to remain in the Catholic Church and convincing answers to Orthodox claims. Order your copy of Answering Orthodoxy today at shop.catholic.com or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
A beacon is a light and will shine it on God's Word. I'm Deacon Harold Burke Sivers, and I invite you to join me tomorrow for Beacon of Truth on most of these EWTN stations. Now back to Catholic Answers Live with Cy Kellett.
A little bit of groovy music. Look at that. It's a Thursday. Jimmy Akin's here. There's a little groovy music. I don't even know what could make this better. What could possibly make this better? Maybe I'll visit from Thomas the TikTok engine to ask a question from TikTok. Hello, Thomas.
Hi, Cy. Glad I can make your day better.
And you, as you generally do. TikTok is still a thing, huh?
It is so far. Seems like the next attempt to ban it has turned into a nothing burger yet again. So
yeah,
we'll wait and see.
All right. Well, you got a question from TikTok for Jimmy?
That's right. Jimmy, I've got this question that was a comment under one of our videos. This person was just asking a curiosity. They wanted to know, during his trial, why didn't Jesus try to stand up for himself? Pilate seemed like he would listen.
Yeah, he didn't stand up for himself or respond to the charges that were being made against him because he didn't want to get off. He didn't want to be released from custody. He didn't want to be exonerated. He wanted to die for the sins of mankind on the cross. And so he deliberately provoked the Jewish authorities by clearing the temple and by acting in such a way that he knew they would come after him, and they did. And once that happened, he was fulfilling the Father's plan. So he didn't want to be let off from the charges against him, even though they were false. He was determined to go to the cross and offer his life in atonement for the sins of the world as a sacrifice of love. And if he defended himself, it might have thwarted that plan. So he was doing what was consistent with the plan.
That's really interesting. Certainly not a situation that most of us can comprehend, I think.
Well, I could comprehend the answer.
Oh, sure,
but not
sure,
the situation.
sure.
Yeah.
Not standing there and not defending myself. Yeah.
Right. All right. Well, Thomas, that was a very efficient visit.
That was.
Thank you for that.
Thank you, Jimmy. Thank you, Cy.
All right. See you soon. Maybe next time we'll see you, there will be a new member of the TikTok family, because that's coming up soon.
Very
right?
possibly. Yeah.
All right. Well, pray for Mrs. We'll pray for Mrs. TikTok, and we'll ask for the listeners to as well. Teresa.
Please do. Please do. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, Thomas.
Thank you.
Okay. This next question, this is from Ben. I have two, is what Ben says. I see. What does it mean when the church says that Mary's virginity remained intact during childbirth? Is this belief dogma?
Well, the belief that Mary remained a virgin is a dogma. She was a perpetual virgin throughout her life. The question is, what does that mean in physical terms when she's giving birth to Christ? One proposal, and this has been the traditional understanding, is that God miraculously preserved her hymen during the birth process so that it was not broken, and she retained what you could call hymen virginity. There are different ways that could have happened. One way that has been commonly proposed is that Jesus basically teleported out of her womb. Sometimes various Catholic authors have compared it to light passing through a glass. And we even have in the first century a report of at Jesus's birth, there was an enormous light, and then behold, there was the baby. He just like teleported out of the womb. And obviously, if that happened, then it wouldn't break the hymen. And so Mary would continue to have this hymen virginity, if you want to call it that. It's also possible God could have brought him out of the womb through the birth canal, but in a way that didn't damage the hymen. However, even though this kind of solution is the most normal one historically, miraculous preservation of the hymen itself is not dogma. What's dogma is she remained virgin, not that her hymen was preserved. Contemporary theologians thus have thought in terms of other possibilities, and they tend to think of virginity as not a physical state like having an intact hymen, but as the absence of having engaged in reproductive behavior. If someone has not engaged in reproductive behavior, then they're a virgin. And so whether or not they have an intact hymen doesn't really determine on this view whether they're a virgin or not, because virginity is not based on a physical structure. And as an argument in that direction, supporters of this view could point out that the hymen can be ruptured by things other than reproductive behavior, and that some women just have no hymen. So having an intact hymen is not necessary to be a virgin, and therefore Mary need not have had a miraculous birth, even though she did have a miraculous conception for her son.
Thank you very much for that question, Ben. And I think this one is what he means by I have two. This is his second question, I'm gathering. Is it appropriate to worship...
That's why there's a two in front of it.
I got it. Is it appropriate to worship God in Mary due to theosis? If in heaven the saints are united to the divine nature in a similar way to Christ's hypostatic union, wouldn't it be appropriate to worship God in the glorified saints? I know it's not appropriate, but I just need help understanding the distinctions.
Okay, so The saints are not hypostatically united to God. A hypostatic union is where you become one person. So, for example, it gets used actually differently, but the hypostatic union of Christ's two natures, is his human nature and his divine nature, is such that they form one person. It's not like there are two Christs, a human Christ and a divine Christ. There's just one person. And so God's divinity is united to Christ in a unique way. It is not the way that God is united to the saints. So Mary is not God incarnate. Other saints are not God incarnate. Only Jesus is God incarnate. And so because Jesus is God incarnate, it's appropriate to worship him as God, but it's not appropriate to worship others as God, except of course the Father and the Spirit. Now you could say, well, God is omnipresent, so he's obviously present in Mary and in other saints and in all of us here on earth in different ways. And God can always be worshiped. So can you say, well, we should worship God in other people? And I think you can say that as long as you make sure that you're distinguishing between God and the person. We can worship God in places where he is, including in other people, as long as you're worshiping God. You're not worshiping the person. So we can worship God in Jesus, but we can also worship Jesus himself because he is God. When it comes to Mary, we can worship God who is present in Mary, but we can't worship Mary herself because she's not God.
All right. Thank you for both of those questions. That was Ben. Thank you, Ben, for both of those questions. It's Internet Open Forum. This one comes from Anthony. Is there a definitive teaching or even different schools of speculation on whether or not your guardian angel is specifically assigned only to you? That is, the GA only, I like it, your GA, only ever served as your guardian for you? Or do they get different assignments when their guardies die? Asked another way, are there the same number of guardians as there are or have been or will be human beings? Or do the guardians guard different folks throughout their careers?
Yeah, we touched on aspects of this previously on today's show, but the answer is we don't know. Mm-hmm. It's possible that guardian angels have a series of assignments over time, so they, will serve more than one person. It's also possible that they are serving more than one person concurrently. They've got they're like shepherds. They've got a little flock of people that they're caring for. As long as they can adequately guard their charges, there's no reason they couldn't do more than one. So there's a lot of different possibilities here. It's also possible that more than one angel is guarding us. Even if there's one regular angel, he might have associates, like a little group of shepherds that are helping him out. We know that we do have guardian angels, but frankly, we have to leave all these other questions. We can think about the possibilities, but frankly, we have to leave all of these other mysteries to God because he hasn't told us the answer.
Thanks, Anthony. I appreciate the question. That'll take us to the break. We'll take a quick break, right back with more. Yeah.
And I should mention Anthony's possibility is one of them, that there's a one-to-one relationship between guardians and humans. So the number of guardians and the number of humans are equal.
Okay.
That's another possibility.
For some reason, I would find that motivating if that were the case. I should do better. If I got one guardian angel, I would like to make his job easier. Or if he's just got one me, in other words. Anthony, thanks. We got to take a break. We'll be right back with more Internet Open Forum with Jimmy Akin on Catholic Answers Live.
Hang on. Catholic Answers Live will return in a moment.
In Morse code, the sequence SOS is a distress call. It's been said that it stands for Save Our Souls. Well, right now our world is in big trouble, and we're putting out an SOS call for help. Will you answer that call? St. Paul Street Evangelization, a Catholic nonprofit, has hundreds of teams who share the good news with souls who don't know Jesus. Catholic Answers is supported in part by St. Paul Street Evangelization. Visit streetevangelization.com to get involved.
The most original Catholic content is on EWTN Radio.
What have you always wanted to know about the Vatican? Well, I'm your Vatican insider, and I answer that question when I bring you the news about the Pope, Vatican City, and I share insights and stories from a broad spectrum of church ministries.
Vatican Insider with Joan Lewis. Saturday night, 9 Eastern on EWTN Radio.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. It's an open forum. Jimmy Akin is our guest. It's an internet open forum, so all the questions have come to us via the internet. If you ever want to get in touch with us here at the show, just send an email to radio@catholic.com. And I know Jimmy's got a variety of ways, including, Jimmy, people can get in touch with you through mysterious.fm, right? Is there a...
Yes.
Is there,
yeah.
Jimmy
at mysterious.fm. Or they can do jimmy@catholic.com. I generally, if people are wanting to ask an internet open forum question, I would suggest using jimmy@catholic.com because that helps it keep my workflow straighter and the right things in the right categories.
Yeah. I was going to say they could send a pigeon, but I actually don't know how the pigeon things work. Like, doesn't a pigeon have to fly home? Like, you can't just send a pigeon to anyone. You can't go to Jimmy's house.
The way homing pigeons work is you attach a message to the pigeon, from a location that's other than where the pigeon lives. So let's say you're in a trench in World War I. Okay, well the pigeon, let's say, lives in Paris at headquarters, but you're out here in a trench and you've got the pigeon with you. You then tie a message to the pigeon, let him go. He'll go back home to Paris to headquarters.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
And then at headquarters, they can read the message.
Yeah. All right. So you would have to actually have pigeons that would fly home to you if people were to send you their message via pigeon.
Yeah, and I've got squirrels, but I'm not interested in pigeons.
I've never heard of a homing squirrel, although that would be awesome if there were homing squirrels. I have not heard of that. Rob wants to know this. At what point in attending an illicit or invalid Mass should the laity speak up or choose not to receive communion?
Okay, technically no masses are invalid. What can be invalid is the consecration within the Mass. And either if the consecration is invalid or if there's another major defect in the Mass, it'll make the Mass illicit, meaning performed not in compliance with the law. So we got two questions here. When should you not receive communion and when should you speak up? Well, one should not receive communion if one knows for a fact that the consecration was invalid. So if you know it as an absolute fact, let's say, and this is very hard actually for people in the pews to know, because the sacraments are like Tonka trucks. It's hard to break them. God made them that way since he knew we would screw things up. So he made it hard to screw up the sacraments in an invalidating way. But let's suppose you're in the pew and you see the priest has just forgotten to say the words of consecration. Well, that can happen. Priests, lose their place, their mind wanders, they can forget to say the words of consecration. And unfortunately, it's not just them who can forget things. We could forget things too. He might have said the words and we just forgot it. But if that's not the case, if you were watching carefully and he just didn't say the words of consecration, then the elements have not been consecrated and you should not receive communion. So that's the basic answer to that. If you know for a fact it's invalid, then you shouldn't receive. When to speak up is a harder matter that involves prudential judgment. In the ideal, one should speak up as soon as you realize that the consecration was, for a fact, invalid. Like you see the priest forgets the words of consecration, you could go, "Father, don't forget the words of consecration."
Yeah.
That would be the ideal, alerting him quickly. Maybe not by shouting, but by letting him know in one way or another quickly while the problem can still be addressed. On the other hand, there can be situations where it could cause even bigger problems to do something like that. And it would cause bigger problems, like encourage a priest to desecrate the Eucharist at future masses or something. That would be a bigger problem than just accidentally omitting the words in this one mass. But if it would cause bigger problems, then it would justify being quiet for the moment and trying to deal with the situation afterwards, possibly involving the bishop if necessary. Being quiet would have undesirable consequences. Some people who are present probably wouldn't realize the consecration was invalid, and they would erroneously think Jesus was present when in fact he was not. However, God does not hold people accountable for things they were innocently ignorant of. And so hypothetically, there could be larger situations that would need to be dealt with in some cases, but such situations are rare, and the ideal is let the priest know as soon as you become aware, even if it's not by shouting from the pew. You could, for example, go up to the deacon and alert him or something like that, and then he could whisper to the priest what the issue is. But unless you are sure, then you shouldn't be shouting from the pews. You need to be sure that the consecration wasn't invalid in order to refrain from receiving, and you got to be sure if you want to take any kind of immediate in-the-moment action. Although if you're not sure, you can always raise questions later, but you shouldn't be shouting from the pews.
Rob, thanks for the question. On we go. This one comes from Mark. If God doesn't change, the God is simple argument, how does that square with Jesus gaining a human nature?
Well, okay, this comes up periodically, and I'll answer it again this time. But then I may take a break from this question for a while. The answer is in the eternal now, where his divinity is, God does not change. In the eternal now, God has always had a human nature that is found in time. And that human nature begins around the year 3 BC. So if you're God in the eternal now and you're looking at history, you always see that you don't have a human nature prior to 3 BC, and you always do have a human nature in time beginning with 3 BC. And so that's how you are unchanging in eternity, but Jesus could still change through time. From an eternal perspective, there is no change. There is no incarnate Jesus before 3 BC. There is an incarnate Jesus after 3 BC. And that is always, both of those are always the case from an eternal perspective.
Mark, thank you for the question. On we go with George's question. George asked this: I've heard people say that the hats that bishops wear symbolize their authority. Can you please expand on this?
Well, I assume that George is referring to mitres, which are in the Latin tradition, are those kind of pointy hats that bishops wear. They kind of flare out and then flare back in and come to a point. Those are known as mitres, and it's true. They do symbolize the bishop's authority. If someone's wearing one of those, it tells you he's a bishop. So it's a sign of rank, just like, in the military, officers have different numbers of stripes and things like that to indicate what rank they are. Well, in the clergy, they also can have headgear to tell you what their rank is. And if they're wearing a mitre, that tells you they're a bishop.
All right, George, thanks for that one. This one comes from Joanne. What does it mean that the disciples didn't know Jesus till the breaking of the bread?
Well, so I'll tell you my preferred solution, and then I'll tell you another one that I know some have proposed. My preferred solution, because it says that the two disciples' eyes were kept from recognizing Jesus. This is in Luke 24, if you want to look it up. It sounds to me like they have what you could call induced prosopagnosia. Prosopagnosia is otherwise known as face blindness. Prosopon is the Greek word for face, and agnosia means not knowing. So if you have prosopagnosia, then you don't recognize somebody by their face. And that's consistent with what Luke says. He says their eyes were kept from recognizing him. It's like they otherwise would have recognized him, but there was an intervention miraculously that kept that process from happening. So it sounds to me like God has induced prosopagnosia in these two disciples. And so that's why I say induced prosopagnosia is my preferred solution here. And then when Jesus takes the bread and breaks it, it says their eyes were opened. And so that sounds like the induced prosopagnosia stopped and they could now recognize Jesus. Their brains were no longer failing to process the recognition of who he was. And it's like, oh, you're Jesus. I can see it now. So that's my preferred solution. I am aware of others. One solution is Jesus had some kind of quirk about how he broke bread compared to other people. And that quirk in the breaking of bread, so like he ripped the host a certain way or ripped the pita a certain way, that let them know he was Jesus. I find that implausible, though, because the text, when you read the text itself, it focuses on their eyes and on the processes happening with them. Their eyes were kept, and then their eyes were open. It doesn't focus on what Jesus is doing with his hands. And then you get a later summary when they're relating it to the apostles after it's already happened. Luke says they related how they recognized him in the breaking of bread, but that doesn't mean the way he broke the bread. It just means during a meal, because every meal was a breaking of bread. So we were breaking bread with him, and that's when we recognized him. I think that's all that is likely to mean.
Joanne, thank you. I'm moving quick now because we're getting near the end, and there's lots of great questions. Brian wanted to know this, Jimmy. Can any parameter of creation be infinite?
Yes, I think so. The future of creation is infinite. There's not going to be a stop to it. And so in my mind, if the future can be infinite, then the past could have also been infinite if God had chosen to create an infinite past. And if the temporal dimensions of creation can be infinite, then the spatial dimensions could also be infinite. So God could, in my mind, create infinite space for creation and infinite time in both directions. We know he didn't do that for the past, but he could have if he chose. That's my view, but other people make arguments to the contrary.
All right, Brian also asked this question. In what sense do unicorns exist, or any other fantasy idea like orcs or dragons?
Well, believe it or not, unicorns exist in multiple senses. There are several different types of unicorns that really do exist. And we'll be having a 2-part look at unicorns on Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World in June, where we go through unicorn lore and then show you what in reality actually corresponds to that. We'll also be doing dragons in the future. Basically, dragon legends seem to be based on dinosaur bones that people have been finding throughout history. But unicorns definitely do exist. Some of them are naturally have one horn, and some of them artificially have one horn. But they are real, and there are several different types of them.
Wait, unicorns are real?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Several types.
All right. We'll have to look
Both
forward to that.
Natural and artificial.
We'll have to look forward to that in June. Brett asked this. I have a hard time learning languages. I get the principles, but the memorizing of endings gets me. I'm better at reading and working it out than listening and translating by hearing. I desperately want to learn Greek for purposes of studying the Bible. What program, book, software, class, etc. would you recommend to someone who wants to learn biblical Greek?
Okay, so one thing you can do if you have trouble memorizing endings is take a tip from Pimsleur, which focuses on memorizing the ending of a word first before you memorize the rest of it. Also, I would recommend, since I don't have a lot of time, I would recommend Basics of Biblical Greek by Bill Mounts. And there's a selection of products that are all part of the Basics of Biblical Greek paradigm. But of the programs that currently exist, that's the one I'd recommend for a beginner who's serious about learning it.
Thanks, Brett. Thanks to everybody who submitted questions. There's lots more, so we will get to do this again. Jimmy, thank you. I really enjoyed those 2 hours.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Yeah, I'm glad we survived the eclipse as well. All right. Well, Darren, and thanks for the groovy music. I do appreciate that. We're done for today. We'll see you next time, God willing, right here. Oh, tomorrow's Weird Questions with the same Jimmy Akin. See you then on Catholic